Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 66th call of the Amazon Investor Coalition. This is a weekly call and podcast series dedicated to advancing forest-friendly economic development and the rule of law across the Amazon region of South America. This week, we are featuring the work of the River Styx Foundation and Miriam Volat, and I think there's a chance we will be visited by Les Sabo from Dr. Bronner's. Let's go ahead and start with Miriam. Miriam, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? How did you get involved in these issues?
Well, thank you, Jonah. And nice to meet everybody here. I was telling Jonah before everybody came on that if I could read everything and be at every Monday meeting, I would feel like I was actually informed. So grateful to be with you all. And I grew up in Sonoma County, California, and I still live there today with my daughter, who's 17. And I had the very good fortune of growing up with parents who didn't put me in school. I was born in the 1970s, and so I benefited from getting to run around and be outside most of the time, and really fell in love with the creeks where I grew up. And that led me by hook or by crook to becoming a soil ecologist and studying nutrient cycling and agroecosystems. And most of my career, I then did multi-stakeholder work, mostly pre-policy work on climate and ag issues. And then about 6 years ago, I came on board with the River Styx Foundation, mostly to support with our Indigenous programming. And that's been an incredible learning experience. And what we've been doing at River Styx and partnering with Dr. Bronner's a lot on this is doing deeply engaged work with Indigenous communities that are reliant on medicines that are now being impacted by the sort of psychedelic, the sort of renaissance of interest in psychedelics. And so most of my work is actually supporting Indigenous peyote conservation. And then now in this last 2 years, through that work, it's really expanded to work with other keystone medicines. So.
Great, we'll get into those.
Mm-hmm.
In Les's absence, can you just give us a couple sentences about Dr. Bronner's and its role in fair trade?
Yeah, so Dr. Bronner's is this incredible company that all of their products, and probably most of you are familiar with their soaps, hand sanitizers, but also chocolate and coconut oils. All of their products are sourced in, I would say, beyond fair trade manner. A lot of technical supports for the communities that they work in, complete fair trade. And then all of their profits, the family's profits, they actually put into philanthropy, supporting those communities and other sort of social justice efforts in the US and kind of all over the country. And they've been our primary partners at River Styx in doing Indigenous medicine support over the last 5 years with particular communities. And now as we're branching into doing more systemic work, they're joining us as full partners in that.
I can testify that part of the supply chain of Dr. Bronner's does source from Brazil and create some jobs in the Amazon region. Mm-hmm. Now tell us about the River Styx Foundation. I've heard you guys called a pioneer in the field of psychedelic therapy.
Yeah, so River Styx Foundation was founded with UPS money. My co-director's great-grandfather was one of the founders of UPS, and his grandmother formed the foundation and was instructed to use that money for good in the world. And 14 years ago, Cody Swift, my co-director, was reading an article about that there were people doing some research on the benefits of psychedelics for trauma and for spiritual connection, and called up Johns Hopkins, and they, in fact, were wanting to do a study that was at that time unfunded to look at addressing cancer anxiety with psychedelics, and he became their first funder. And River Styx ever since has been supporting efforts in psychedelic research, as well as psychedelic therapy. And we also have worked on social justice, decriminalization of drugs, although we can talk a little bit about that when you get into decriminalization with indigenous medicines, it becomes a little bit more complicated. And as well as supporting efforts at death care and having death care be done in a really good way. And what we call our biocultural programming, which is early stage projects, either that need philanthropic support or impact investing, that are working with things that have been stigmatized by society, like composting toilets, composting dead bodies, that are being worked with in a way that brings more ecological balance and healing.
I'm familiar with some of the legal and scientific breakthroughs that have accompanied psychedelic therapy. It'd be great if you could give us a little bit about that background, but also about the boom in psychedelic therapy investing. I think I put out in the email one quote, one statistic. It's expected that the psychedelic therapy investing field will exceed $2 billion investing in just this year alone.
Yes, I mean, I'll say that our focus has really been on the research around psychedelic assisted therapy for trauma, for addiction, but also for supporting religious professionals and having direct experience of the divine. We're actually engaged in a qualitative study and hopefully rolling out a movie on that. Hospice work, inflammation. We're also very interested in access. So access for BIPOC communities and communities that might not otherwise, if it isn't really encouraged, having access. And we're very interested in the nonprofit pharmaceutical companies like MAPS, USONA. We've supported with Hefter, NYU, Johns Hopkins. And now we are in our impact investing program looking more and more at the psychedelic field. We also do impact investing with indigenous foodways. Just to answer your question, I got our numbers from our impact investment strategist, Kevin Bayek, just a little bit ago. And in 2017, there were $3 million. And then in 2021 to date, there's 540 million just for private investment, not even the public markets. And so that just gives you a sense of what an incredible boom is happening. And, you know, one of our topics today, the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund, is not necessarily in direct response to that, but hopes to be woven into this explosion in interest and investment dollars.
Great. So before we get into the fund, let's just cover 3 vocabulary things that are going to come up. So they are allyship. I'd love you to describe that, and I'm going to name the other 2. Biocultural protections. Tell us a little bit about what that means. And then third is the Nagoya Protocol.
Yeah, so allyship, you know, you can look up definitions of it. And I think today I'll really share more about what we've learned from working in these communities. And one of the things I can say about how we work and also how Bronner's work is we are really doing a kind of very deeply engaged philanthropy. So for example, we don't take grant proposals. All of our philanthropy is based on really deep relationships and conversations with people. And so one of the things that I would share about allyship, and I'd love to hear what other people say, is that it's something very active. It's not a prescriptive kind of an activity. I think that the most important piece with allyship is listening. And we're always learning and honing our ability to listen. And so like with Indigenous medicine conservation and working with Indigenous communities, that takes time and patience. So part of allyship is time, conversations, patience, and then really centering, and we can talk more about what this means, but biocultural community rights, and that those are actually based on culture, they're based on territory, they're based on honoring traditional knowledge, based on consent. And then, you know, when we talk about the Nagoya protocols and biocultural protections, we talk more about this, but it is based on benefit sharing. And I think somebody said that they like that word reciprocity. And I think with allyship, you really have to look at and learn about what is reciprocity. So reciprocity isn't just showing up with something that you think is a good idea to give somebody, right? It's actually an exchange. It's a relationship. It's back to that word listening, but not just listening, really listening for understanding and having a conversation. And so for us, allyship has ended up looking a lot like being almost like bridge people with some of these communities where we're interfacing with what they would call the outside world, lifting up their voices, their interests, the way that they want to be engaged with, and then also really being in the communities. And sometimes we have ideas about what might work based on being like a scientist or a business person or a philanthropist, and actually really having to sort of check ourselves and listen for the strategies and kinds of support, whether it's technical support or financial support or networking or connections that people on the ground really doing their own biocultural protections actually really want to see. And so I think, you know, it also does take acknowledging that, you know, sort of business as usual, kind of what a lot of our Indigenous partners call kind of settler colonial business as usual, is about consolidating wealth, and that a lot of allyship actually, wealth and knowledge. And so a lot of allyship is looking at ways that we can actually spread out wealth and be honest about where power and control are held and spread that out as well. And so I would say I'm just feel like I'm a baby with learning about allyship, and we at River Styx feel like we're just learning, but those are some of the things that are at the top of our minds all the time. Yeah.
Great. And I'll just give an add-on sentence about definitions, and then we can move into your presentation.
Okay.
So the Nagoya Protocol is part of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and it requires wealth creation from biodiversity to be shared with source communities. Miriam, go ahead if you want to share slides.
Yeah, and I would just add on that, you know, one of the things that we're doing in allyship now is making sure that people know about the Nagoya protocols and helping to figure out ways to utilize the Nagoya protocols. We actually even have one of our program officers now. She's Menominee Oneida. Her name is Sutton King, and she'll actually be leading over 2022 a series of meetings on the Nagoya protocol, which people are interested, they could get involved in, where we'll be looking at how Nagoya protocol it particularly impacts some of the medicines that are impacted by psychedelic business, and then informing the communities that rely on those medicines how they can engage or utilize the Nagoya protocols and how they can support their governments to actually put them into actual frames and formats. So,
as you put up the link, I'll just name one more. I just included a link to the Brazilian Genetic Heritage Management Council, which is like the local state Brazilian version of the Nagoya Protocol to require benefit sharing within the nation of Brazil itself.
And I think Peru, Ecuador, Colombia are also all signers to the Nagoya Protocol. It doesn't mean that they have their legal frameworks all in place, but they are signers. And then, Jonah, if it's okay, I know we were going to touch on this word biocultural, which is such an interesting word, and that we're using in all of our projects now. And it basically adds on to the idea of biodiversity conservation, which of course is to preserve diversity, to have sustainable utilization, to maintain the life supporting systems essential to ecological processes. And then biocultural means essentially that the cultural knowledge of how to do that and the cultural relationships and things like rights of nature are essential and actually equally important and necessary to that biological conservation. All right, okay. So Les was going to help me with this, but I will do my best. I'm going to share my screen.
We see it, looks good.
Yeah, you can see. All right. So let me see. So out of doing the peyote work and getting deeply into working closely with these communities that were really looking to conserve their medicine for future generations, that they were wanting to make sure that they had not only their culture, but the territories and ecosystems and the medicine that grows there accessible to their grandchildren. We started to engage in some other efforts. We supported a biocultural sustainability assessment of Iboga. And then we did that with ayahuasca, but also a community-based assessment with ayahuasca. And what we found is that there was a lot of similarities to what the communities that have these medicines at the center of their culture, or at least deeply ingrained in their culture, needed in order to have conservation happen and in order for them to have community health. And so we started to see that Indigenous people with a lot of these medicines were actually the keystone stewards for not just the biodiversity and the culture, but that was intimately related to community health. So we started to look at what would it look like to really invest in Indigenous sovereignty, invest in these communities that are really at the intersection of not just biodiversity, but also sustainable products, psychedelics, and conservation. And most of you on this call already know this, but these are people who are stewards to 30% of the most important land for climate resiliency. That this was one of the key ways that we could engage as philanthropists and investors in really addressing post-colonial trauma in the movement, so that if the psychedelic movement was able to actually address trauma of all these communities at the same time as it's attempting to address mental health in mainstream communities, that would be this incredible healing opportunity. And then just the incredible value of preserving traditional knowledge and supporting Indigenous sovereignty, having this conservation and territory access and voices actually come from Indigenous sovereignty. And this felt like one of the most important ways that we could decolonize our own philanthropy as well as our investment. And so we want to see this new burgeoning industry really satisfy the Nagoya protocols, engage in benefit sharing, and really engage in supporting these communities. So the fund that we actually decided to start it 2 years ago, but you'll see in a moment why it's actually been quite a lot of work to design a fund that can accomplish all these things. And so this slide says our commitment grows from listening, and I wanted to put the listening piece in because we spent a lot of time listening to these communities about what they wanted from a fund. we also wouldn't probably have never started this effort if people hadn't asked us to. So some of the communities we were supporting, they said, you're in a position to interface with the wider world. Would you please help us create something where we're not just talking to lots and lots and lots of people, but we can have something that we really trust that's an interface for that. And so that commitment is really to ensure that conservation efforts are Indigenous led, that the biocultural conservation strategies in different locales are really informed by community-based assessments that take into account culture and ecology and the biological situation of the different plants. That we would do everything we could to ensure sustainable, ethical, and culturally sensitive supply and demand. That we would maintain a governance process that would support trust between those Indigenous partners and funders or investors. And so you'll see that's where we've had to do the most rigorous work. That we would attempt to influence non-Indigenous consumer habits for making sustainable choices about medicine. And, you know, back to the word allyship, sometimes that's really hard. We'll talk about the Amazon, but working with peyote, for example, we've had to really recommend to consumers that if they want to partake of mescaline, that peyote isn't really for anybody except for Indigenous people at this time, because it's so at risk and they have other choices and they should be making them, like San Pedro or other plants. And that we really wanted to support building sustaining infrastructure that would support medicine sovereignty for the long term. And so what we initially did is we identified what we're calling our keystone biocultures, using the ecological term keystone to support the understanding that these medicines are actually part of whole biocultures, and that without them, those cultures and those ecosystems collapse. And so we're working with Iboga and the Bwiti people and Pygmy people in Gabon. We're working with ayahuasca or yahe, it has other names as well, in the Amazon. We're working with peyote, which is in the Chihuahua Desert, in Mexico, the US, but we're also working with people in Canada who have traditional heritage with peyote, and then working with bufo, with the toad, and mushroom. And today I'm going to focus on ayahuasca a little bit, but if folks are interested in the other biocultures, we can talk about that. And so in order to create this trusted body and follow the biocultural conservation principles as closely as we could and do medicine sovereignty and support Indigenous governance, we have got behind a governance model and created a governance model which is actually Indigenous led. So the final decisions on who will be funded and how the funding will go out to communities, as well as what technical support will be provided, is made up, that final decision is made by what we call our conservation committee. And the conservation committee is made up of technical specialists that are invited by the Indigenous communities, and then Indigenous community representatives who have experience in traditional knowledge, and sometimes in other scientific methodologies. And this committee is actually responsible for interpreting the community assessments that have happened on the ground, bringing forward a suite of projects which are high leverage strategy in their region, in their territory, and then having that be approved by the whole conservation committee. They're supported by a spiritual infrastructure. So in each of these communities, there are spiritual advisors who put the goals and the interests of the community and what they want to be supported into their seasonal prayers and things. We don't ask them to come to Zoom meetings or be involved in the governance in a formal way, because they don't like to be on Zoom and they probably won't come. And then we have an operations committee, which is essentially made up of the philanthropists and investors and staff that kind of do the operational pieces. And in order to maintain this kind of high level of trust, we've gone through a fairly complex but really thorough process, which I think has been really, really important in terms of being able to roll out what we're doing in the communities. So in each community, this began with relationships or requests. We have quite a network of people on the ground in each country. And then they do these community-based primary research activities, like in the Amazon. Just in the Shipibo part, we bought a boat, and there was a bunch of youth and then elders who went out to all the communities and talked with elders about what do you need in order to have our culture and our medicine preserved into the future. And some of the answers that we got were surprising and not necessarily what we always would have expected. Then that's joined with technical advisors and the indigenous conservationists. They do an analysis of the assessments and put together a suite of grantee proposals, which are then approved by consensus. And I'm happy to answer any questions about this process. We had it looked at by a number of indigenous philanthropy people, indigenous investors, and put actually a lot of work into this. Our hope is that this fund will become its own entity when it's ready and graduate off from River Styx and Bronner's and have a governance process in place that will be able to take it, into the future. So I'm going to focus today on ayahuasca, or yahe. And I think probably most people know this, but ayahuasca actually isn't just one plant, right? It's a combination of plants, Banisteriopsis caapi, and different psychotrias that different communities in the Amazon use and combine in different ways. And it's used in ceremony and healing and also community process differently in different tribes. And that's one of the things that we've had to learn, is coming to consensus in such a complicated place as the Amazon around talking about sort of the culture and traditions around one medicine is actually quite complicated, because people are using this plant differently. It integrates into their culture differently. They have very, very different views. For example, I heard somebody talking about ecotourism, and we have some of the tribes that are incredibly interested and have long histories of engaging with folks from the West in healing ceremony and exchanging knowledge. And then we have other tribes that don't do that at all and don't want to do it. We have one tribe that we're working with, the Huni Queen, who have quite a complicated way of approaching that, where they have some communities deep in the Amazon that don't interface with the Western world at all, whereas they have other communities that are closer into where there's bigger settlements who do interface, and that's part of their job, and that's an understood piece in their culture. So out of our assessments in the Amazon, we had sort of 5 major areas that came up in the communities that were really important to folks. And those were ecological, so that there should be integrated and regenerative agricultural models and protection of wild ayahuasca. Interestingly enough, ayahuasca was not considered to really be at threat. It was much more about the territory here. So most of the community said, if we have access to our territory, if we have sovereignty over our territory, then we already know how to take care of our of the medicine for ourselves. If there's people out in the bigger world who want to use it, then that would be when we would encourage other kinds of integrated agriculture models. And then culture was extremely important, because when you're doing biocultural conservation, basically most of the elders that we talked to in the Amazon said we really can't preserve our medicine ways if we don't have language preservation, supporting our elders to be healthy and have access to youth. So a lot of the emphasis was on building common spaces for ceremony, for community strategy, for governance. And then economic, people are interested in direct benefit from exchange models for traditional indigenous users that are on their terms and set by them. And then, you know, and an example of that would be, you know, some of these ayahuasca places where people go for ayahuasca tourism, having places like that really focus on having traditional healers have leadership roles in those centers. And then sovereignty. Sovereignty came up a lot as strengthening alliances between tribes. One of the groups that I think Jonah shared a link to is called UMIAC, which is the United Medics of Yahe of the Amazon, and in Colombia. And that is actually an alliance of 5 tribes that aren't traditionally friendly with each other, but in the late 90s, they came together to protect their medicine, primarily at the threat of oil incursion. And so what they do now is they support about 1,000 taitas or medicine elders to do what are called healing brigades, as well as a number of other activities. And the healing, what they do with the healing brigades is they bring elders out into communities that have been impacted by armed conflict. And they do ceremonies for directly addressing trauma from that, bringing young men back into their communities who were, you know, have been killing people and things like that. About 1/3 Indigenous women in that part of Colombia have been raped. And so they do ceremonies particularly for those women. And then the other thing that they do is ceremonies for families that have been torn apart because of oil incursion and some of the problems in their territory with one part of a family being paid off and another part of the family being mad. And so they directly address that through their ceremonies. And so one of the things that was recommended a lot is supporting those kinds of alliances, and mutual governance really strengthens the communities. And an example of reciprocity that also comes out of UMIAC that I'll share is, you know, there's a lot of interest in research for ceremonies, research in the medicine. And what UMIAC has done is said, okay, well, we're willing to allow some research and qualitative research on our ceremonies, but the questions that get asked will be asked by our elders. The data that gets generated will be utilized by us to strengthen our, you know, the way the outside world looks at how important what we're doing is, so that we can use it to protect our territory. And so that's a really great example, I think, of reciprocity between research and a set of communities. So the research gets to happen. All of us in the Western world get to understand more qualitatively about, you know, what can happen in these kinds of medicine ceremonies in terms of healing at multiple levels. But we're also respecting the sovereignty of those communities to direct the questions and to utilize the data to support their own territorial concerns. And so you can imagine that another big piece was, you know, focusing on Indigenous land rights. What are the laws around importation? Can they benefit Indigenous people? Legal protections for healers, government recognition, and then, like I said, you know, working on how Nagoya Protocol frameworks can actually be followed through on to support these communities. And then just the mechanisms for benefit sharing. You know, a lot of these communities don't necessarily have that in place. Yes, Jonah?
I just want to encourage you to see if you can finish up in 5 minutes so that we'll have space for questions at the end.
Absolutely. Here's just this kind of gives you a picture of the kinds of organizations that the fund is supporting and kind of the range in the Amazon. Another piece I'll just share with you is that we are looking at how to support, for lack of a better word, consumers and folks really interested in, psychedelics and their own healing and community healing in the West, how they can engage in these medicines without harming Indigenous communities biologically or culturally. And then one of the things that we're just communicating, at least with the psychedelic movement, is that this is really a moment to define the legacy. The psychedelic movement's still in this moment of taking form, and we're just really suggesting, encouraging, and creating a vehicle for folks to not bypass, so really supporting and lifting up these Indigenous communities at the same time as we're working on all of this other collective healing. So
great. Thank you so much. I'm going to include one last link, and then those who would like to ask questions, please feel free to signal in the chat or to raise your hand or just to come off mic. Right before Miriam and I started the call, we talked about one company that in the psychedelic therapy space that is focused not on the broad spectrum of psychedelics, but specifically on ayahuasca. And its website is sacredmedicines.earth. I've just posted it below for those of you who are looking for relevant companies in the area. Okay, it looks like we have Simon up with the first question. And then Constantine.
Yes. Thank you so much, Miriam. I hope you can hear me. Yes, I think so. Wow, I was overwhelmed by your work. I didn't know that something like that existed. I'm from a small NGO based in Berlin, which created a bridge to the Honey Queen people. So it all started by creating a healing biotope in Brazil, where people interested from Germany and Honey Queen people could meet and doing ceremonies and just bringing together people and trying to make both cultures benefit from each other, and also raising money for a project of buying a big piece of land for the Honey Queen in Acre. So we were right at the process of buying this 160 square kilometers land for Honey Queen people. And well, so this process is already almost done, and we want to create a model area for conservation led by Indigenous people, led by the Honey Queen people. And so I was very interested in your work, because Honey Queen people are already in the area receiving outsiders to doing ceremonies. In the region, they're quite open to do this, although it's quite distant from bigger cities. But yeah, so my question is, we're just in the process of trying to establish a management plan for this new land that we are buying. So how we structure, how we help them making decisions, making the right decisions. Will be all them making the decisions, but we want to support them in this process. And also, preserving the medicine and trying to find the best ways of doing this, like, let's say, spiritual tourism, which from our point of view is a good opportunity for them, and we know that they want it, but it has to be done in the right way. So my question is, how could we, all the Honey Queen people on the ground that are involved in our project, how could we benefit from your resources, like scientific resources, or how could we get a connection?
Yes, well, you can reach out to me directly and I can put you in touch with our the Amazon team that we have. But I think that's actually a really, really important piece because this technical support, back to this idea of reciprocity, this isn't just about money, right? It's about standing, side by side with people and listening to what kind of resources they want from the Western world in order to support them having the knowledge going forward that they want to either preserve or gain. And so technical support, like for land management process, is very, very key. I also used to teach in permaculture design courses. And so I love and have a network of designers who have experience working with Indigenous communities and going through design processes with them. And I'd be happy to help you connect. We also have a team now. The Huni Queen were the last group that actually came on board just recently with our fund, and I'm happy to connect you with the team that's supporting there. But I'll put my email in the chat.
Great.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna reach out to you, and we gonna try to connect.
We have several more questions lined up, so we're going to take two at a time. And I would like to ask everyone to keep it brief so that we have enough space to get through everyone. So next up is Constantine and then Gregory. Constantine, you're up. And go ahead and ask them back to back, and then Miriam can reply to those two questions at once.
You want me to read them? So
sure, or you can just ask them.
Okay, so what about the patents? And I also asked if there are research projects which foresee this intellectual property issue in order to confer co-authorship in the research. Thank you.
And then Greg?
And for me, Miriam, my questions are sort of related to your notion and your concept of reciprocity. And so I'm really keen to understand the sort of non-financial dividends, which you were starting to talk about. And I'm also curious about what I would think of as sort of the capital stack, right? Where are philanthropic funds used? Where are sort of modest returns used? Where are sort of higher returns used? How do you think about the sort of blended capital model of the returns and use of capital and those sorts of things?
Great, thank you. Well, Constantine, this is a really, really important question and probably deserves a couple hours. One of the things, or a couple days, two things that I'll comment on. One is that we've been supporting some of our Indigenous partners to get involved in WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization. And that's been a really fascinating process. Some of the connections that are being made there right now is really looking at basically rights of nature approaches where, nature is actually the one that has the IP on how all of this works and what's happening with it. And that's what our Indigenous partners have been saying. And so we're supporting this work with WIPO to look at how that can actually really impact patents around medicines. And then the other thing we're doing is we're hosting next year a series of Nagoya Protocol workshops that are multi-stakeholder and include Indigenous youth, Indigenous elders, biologists, lawyers, investors, all of that coming together to look at how the Nagoya Protocol would be applied in each of these regions with each of these medicines, and trying to just do our best to support both the Indigenous people on the ground with having the knowledge they need about what they can do, but also having multi-stakeholder processes to look at what these frameworks can actually support. And then also looking at how there are people doing some innovative things, which I don't really know yet what they mean. And this is part of what we like to bring to our conservation committees to talk about it. There's people who are talking about drawing patents, but then actually giving the patents to those indigenous communities that have traditional and the ancestral heritage of those plants so that they hold them. I think that is actually a really interesting model. How exactly to do that, I'm not sure. But this is something that I actually would love to learn more about. And I know that some of our indigenous partners really want to know more about, which is why we're doing this series of stakeholder meetings. Yeah. And then as far as your question, Greg, I think, what we're looking at with the fund is a couple different layers of things. We're working with, we're hoping to have companies that are in this space who are interested in reciprocity, interested in benefit sharing, to utilize the fund for really substantial, kind of high impact amounts of money that can really be leveraged on the ground, like in an infrastructure way. And by infrastructure, it's not super expensive in some of these different places, but land, buildings, gasoline, cars. One of the things I've learned really working closely with indigenous communities is a lot of it is like transportation. And then we're also looking at doing more crowdfunding models where we're actually do education for people who are interested in psychedelics, really roll out. It's kind of like if you think about a sustainable fisheries guide, what would that look like for medicine? And then through that, being able to have small amounts of funding continuously coming in to support these communities. With ayahuasca in particular, there's an interest in having like Western ayahuasca churches be connected with certain kind of communities. And so helping with some of those vehicles. But next year, we will have this kind of more like sustainable fisheries type guide rolling out that will also enable you, like if you're in Boston, you want to go to an ayahuasca ceremony, you can just go on the app and send $50 to the Amazon. So we're working on those kind of, educational crowdfunding efforts as well. We're partnering with somebody who has like a whole platform that they're going to use for that. So
Great. Next up, John, and then Brad. And I want to if you guys keep it short, we'll be able to hear from Laurent at the end.
Hi, Miriam. This is John Bruno, and thank you very much for your presentation. I want to tell you that your approach to interaction and engagement with Indigenous communities is one of the most commendable that I've come across. I know you represented yourself as being kind of in the early stages, but I really think it's beautiful the way that you have handled your approach. And I wanted to say that there's also lots of examples around the world of the type of tourism that you're discussing. And it can be very effective if it's undertaken with tourists that are respectful and educated. And so eco-travelers are very effective in that way. For instance, there has been a transition in kava sakau tourism in Micronesia and Fiji that have changed it from, almost a caricature of what it was to a deeply spiritual experience. So there's lots of best practices. I'm going to take your email down and I'll send you my email if you're interested to talk more and maybe share some knowledge.
great. Thank you, John. Yeah.
Go ahead, Brad.
Thank you very much, Miriam. It was a joy to hear everything. And really, the space feels so right for collaboration. And I'm sure there's others working on these things. But some of the things that we found in common were rights of nature, IP on both kana and designs and pharmacology, land-based projects and local governance. So really exciting at the possibility of deeper collaboration. I'm curious, I loved how robust y'all's model is for how you engage in communities, starting with the primary research and then moving into the granting. And I'm curious, after the primary research is done, and then there's the kind of analytics that is performed, and then the project that is kind of that bubbles up out of the analytics, how is the communication with the communities at hand? Like, is it more of a they give their input and then they get a grab bag of possible projects, or is there communication the whole way through as you all narrow in on what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's communication all the way through. And what we've done is part of the assessment is looking at existing organizations. Like, for example, the Shipibo Healers Association, right? So we did, as part of the assessment, was to sit down with them, talk to them about what they saw was needed and what they were going to do. And then essentially they then came into the suite of funding options. So we're not actually trying to invent projects. We're asking people, what is it that you want and need? Who's doing what kind of support would enable you to do what you actually want to do? Now, the only time we're looking at any creation of an organization is when there's really not something there. When there's not something there that is already Indigenous led, that can do disbursement of funds, that can manage projects, that can support these efforts. Because sometimes it's a community, right? Because you just want to build a Maloka so that people can come together to continue to talk. Then we're doing things like, one of the things that's happening in the Amazon is there's an Indigenous Ayahuasca conference that will be focusing on conservation this next year. And they've done it a couple times before, but this year they're actually going to utilize it to deepen their assessment, their own internal assessment across the board. So we're going to support them in that process. Another example would be like with the Bwiti people in Gabon with Iboga, which is, severely at risk. They're actually asking, they say, we actually need a new organization that deals with corruption and deals with competition and is truly neutral. So one of the first things we'll be doing, among other things, is actually supporting their own creation of a representative organization that can help with these things. But we're only doing that when asked. So we're actually not, we talked about permaculture, so it's that idea of composing with as opposed to imposing on. So we're composing with what's already there and what people are saying they want to have happen.
Awesome, thank you.
Laurent.
Yes, I'm also very positively impressed by this presentation, the work that Miriam, your group is doing. It's really great. And it seems like there is a very careful approach. And we at a group in the UDV has been working with indigenous communities, especially supporting some groups in reviving the use of ayahuasca, that in some cases has been lost, over time. And it's really impressive to see the effects, the very positive impact that this has had on these communities, that we can see on their structure, on the way they interact, on strengthening the links, how they rescue also their values, all the traditional. It's really, really beautiful to see that. And I think this still has a very small scale. It's, one work here or there, and the Amazon is huge. But this can, over time, carefully, this can be scaled up. And UDV in particular has a really large network of people. And in many cases that are close to indigenous communities in various regions of the Brazilian Amazon, especially, not only Brazil. And I think to think about scaling up this, we need to have predictability about possibilities of funding for activities, So I think there is really many things that could be explored. I don't think this can be done like in a 5-minute conversation, but really, it's encouraging to see how similar the approach that you have presented is to the one that we also have been using.
Yeah, I think what you just mentioned at the beginning of this reconnection, this is a theme that we've heard in all the communities we've been in. all the keystone medicines, that there's this reconnection that is really needed and wanted. And that's where we're hearing over and over again, we need time and space for elders to be with our youth so that they can reconnect the culture. And we need time in different communities so that we can reconnect the culture. That's like Umiak doing these healing brigades, bringing the ceremonies back to community. And I think that, you know, if you pull out and to the big picture again, reconnection of these medicine ways and culture in these communities is actually unequivocally key to protecting these territories, to ensuring that the engagement with the rest of the world goes in a good way, and that essentially we preserve this, our cultural biological diversity on the planet into the future. So it's really that reconnection word is one that comes up in all the different languages. Yeah.
Great. That brings us to the top of the hour. The call will stay open. We now move to what I call water cooler time, where people can chat with each other, copy the chat, ask unrelated questions, introduce themselves, shameless promotion. It's all there for you. Class dismissed, but let the party begin. I'll start the music. Miriam, are you able to stay with us for a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay, great.
And Miriam, would
free
you
to
please
take
put
the
your email in the chat? I'd love to follow up, please.
Yes.
Laurent, I would be interested in knowing whether or not your work with cattle in the Amazon has linked with UDV.
Oh,
Okay.
no, not directly, only maybe spiritually, but
You should tell us about your work for those who don't know.
okay, so we seek to promote conservation of forests through improving, enhancing the activity that has had most impact on forests in the Amazon, which is cattle ranching. So trying to do it better so that it doesn't harm forests anymore. Basically, just a few words.
Great. Anybody's welcome to take the mic.
Well, I'll just say one more thing. I mean, I think this, you know, one of the things I really appreciated about talking with Jonah before this was, you know, sometimes when we find these intersections, it can be so powerful. So right now, especially with the Amazon, there's this intersection of this kind of explosion of interest in psychedelics, the incredible need to protect the Amazon, the hopefully raising awareness of, you know, what we need to do to mitigate climate change and the importance of Indigenous people in that. And, you know, I'm very curious about ways of communicating, you know, sort of the potential and the urgency of connecting those things, and just curious if anybody has thoughts about where and how to do that to connect these different, you know, groups of interests. What?
One of the things that comes up for me, Miriam, is I'm spending a good amount of time. This is Greg over here. I'm spending a little bit of time, a good amount of time researching the various psychedelic venture capital funds that are raising money right now. And every one of them has some intention to take some percentage of the carry, right, the money that they make on the investments, and do something philanthropic with it or otherwise ethical.
Right.
A number of them have a strong understanding of a desire to integrate or give back into Indigenous communities. I would say few of them know how to do that really effectively. And, you know, for my clients, you know, sort of anything less than a full, deep spiritual commitment to the work is gonna mean that we're not going to choose to invest with those firms. But everyone I talk to is saying it, regardless of how well they're saying it or how deep I sort of assume their intention to be. So that I think there's a crossover opportunity there for you, and forging some of those partnerships could be a link to some folks that otherwise aren't particularly adept in this conversation yet.
Yeah, I think that that's really helpful. I mean, I think one of the things that we found is that now we're having people reach out to us, like, how do we do reciprocity if we have this company and they want to form, you know, have like an Indigenous person on the board, but they don't have relationships. And we've actually ended up having to say to somebody, you know, just getting a token Indigenous person to sit on your, you know, whatever is actually not really very helpful. And so I think we would like this, you know, really robust governance structure that is Indigenous led to really be utilized by companies who want to engage in reciprocity. I think the trick is then on the side of the company, and we're doing things like collecting all the budgets and everything so that people who are used to that have that to look at. But then there's also a way where then the reciprocity that you're doing, the money that you're giving or other kinds of support really will be directed by those communities. And I think for some folks, that's like there's a little bit of a learning curve there yeah. But I really appreciate that, Gregory. If you have any that you think would be interested in using the fund, we're very open.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make some introductions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Miriam. This is Marina.
Hi,
I want to congratulate you for your incredible work. It is really interesting and nice to see someone with a change of approaches that different than we have seen most of the time. So I congratulate you for that. And I was saying there are currently a lot of Indigenous-led funds in the US as well as other countries as well. They're not necessarily just related to medicine or psychedelics, but I was wondering if because some of the things that your funding tend to do have also a much broader benefits than the medicinal plants. So I was wondering if there could be, or if you have already looked for intersections with these Indigenous-led funds. And I'm happy to put you in contact with some of these Indigenous-led funds. There are two of them in pilot mode in Brazil. Okay. And I'm happy to put you in contact with them if you don't have that. I'd love to continue this conversation with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina. I would love that. That would be wonderful. There's a few in the US that I've started to develop relationships with, but not in Brazil. So thank you.
Hi, I would like to present myself. I am a lawyer here in Brazil. I'm also a researcher, and we published one paper alongside with other researchers about the psilocybin, I don't know how to say it, the mushrooms, and our proposal was to think about on community protocols in order to set how to conduct the researchers, and we are almost we're going to publish soon another paper with Eduardo Schembeck, who is a neuroscientist here from Brazil, about the ayahuasca model in the how's it called, the magazine, it's Transcultural Psychiatry. So we're publishing there. So we are in this debate, and I'm very glad to meet you. So I'm taking some notes here, and well, just to say that it was wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you. It's really great to meet you. We have one of our most delicate areas we're working in is actually in the Mazatec Sierra, around psilocybin and benefit sharing. And so I'd love to read your paper, and those are the communities that it's very, very delicate, the work there, but we're trying to figure out how to support. And actually, they have stated that they want to do their own assessment, don't want any help, but then they'll share their results. So it's complicated. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Your time and your presentation was really very, very interesting and makes me hopeful.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Well, it was really wonderful to get to speak with folks who are interested. It makes me feel hopeful as well. You know, back to the ally word, you get into these commitments and then you get deeper and deeper into the commitments and you never know where they're going to take you. And so it feels really wonderful this afternoon. And thank you, Jonah, to get to be with you all who have commitments as well.
If anyone wants links to any of the institutions that have been posted so far, reference organizations or whatever, me and Miriam are in touch with most of them, and we're happy to help facilitate the connections. Just feel free to reach out.
I just shared the link of the paper in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Great. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jonah.
You bet. Thanks, everybody.
Miriam. Give my best to Cuddy.
Okay, will do.
Oh, are you guys waiting on me?
No, I'm just copying stuff from the recording.
Oh, okay. All right. Bye.
Bye. Thanks. Sorry.